And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities. Either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 63 for Wednesday, April the 2nd, 2025. My name is Jason Olbourne. I am 50% of this news partnership, and the other half, here she is right now, Nicola Charles. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, happy hump day, and I'd like to say happy birthday to my husband. I won't say how old he is because then AI will work out who it is from his birthday. But have a great day, hubby. I love you. You've made my life so fantastic and amazing. And very funny last night before I went to bed, Jason. Someone sent me a clip of a film I must admit I've never seen. I must be behind the eight ball for someone who's in the news. A clip of the movie The American President, only it wasn't just a clip of Michael Douglas in the movie The American President. It was intercut with clips of Anthony Albanese, and I thought, this is weird. What's this about? And it would seem that Mr. Albanese has plagiarized the script of the movie and used it some years ago in his own speech. So I thought it might be quite funny on Hump Day to play this for the listeners. This is Michael Douglas in partnership with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
We have serious challenges to solve, and we need serious people to solve them.
We have serious problems to solve, and we need serious people to solve them.
Unfortunately, Tony Abbott is not the least bit interested in fixing any.
Bob Rumson is not the least bit interested in solving it.
He's only interested in two things.
He is interested in two things.
Making Australians afraid of it.
Making you afraid of it.
And telling them who's to blame for it.
And telling you who's to blame for it.
Outstanding. Good on your elbow at the National Press Club.
I mean, for God's sake, I haven't watched that movie, Jason, but obviously Albo has, and he must have watched it and thought, how can I come across like a great leader? I know, I'll watch the movie The American President. I mean, do these people think that this stuff isn't going to come out, Jason?
Well, I think it's even better that he's gone off and watched the Aaron Sorkin American President with Michael Douglas, who in that era was at the peak of his game. Michael J. Fox is in there as, one of the offsiders. And he probably thought, well, nobody's going to watch a political movie. I'll just take Aaron Sorkin's lines and make them my own, and no less at the National Press Club, for goodness sake. And no one cared at all in the media because he's got a Teflon protective coating. Plagiarism? That's only for uni students. It's certainly not for wannabe prime ministers.
I'm surprised, because these people are very big on copyright and patents, and this is a big thing for them. And I wonder if they got permission. If they didn't get permission, they might owe somebody some money, I think, somewhere. But yeah, that was very amusing before I went to bed. I think I laughed for a full 10 minutes after somebody sent me that. I thought, what's this? What's going on? Yeah, absolute madness. And I've also been contacted by listeners to the show who said, why didn't we go through in detail Russell Broadbent's speech from Sunday, where I was MC for one of Russell's speeches? That's not how speeches go, unfortunately. Russell was fabulous, but live speeches are kind of a, you've got to be there to hear them kind of thing. And Russell was very entertaining. I actually only learnt on Sunday that Russell used to be the lead singer in a band in Australia, and he used to support, big singers like Farnham, and his band used to be the opener for big Australian acts. And the reason I found out is because I said to someone afterwards, "My God, he's very good at holding a room." Because there was a lectern where I always put my speeches and refer to notes, and Russell just pushed it to the side, and he was walking around and talking to the audience. It was more like a TED talk, and I said, "Gosh, he's very good in the room, isn't he, at talking to people?" And someone said, "Oh, yeah, that's because he used to be a rock star." And I was like, "What?"
Oh, that's
Uh,
fantastic. Well, his
mm,
band was called the True Tones.
the True Tones. Oh, that fits quite well, doesn't it, with
So
him being an independent?
how about that? So he's a man of many talents. Look, if you want a bit more of a dose of Russell Broadbent, I would encourage people to head over to my X page or Rumble, etc. Even I've got a YouTube page that is completely shadow banned, but you can still find me on there. It's under World Series News. But I have posted the interview that I did for with Russell Broadbent for the 51st State Show on Australian National Review. He was, in fact, my very first guest on this new series that I was invited to participate in. And Russell doesn't hold back. And the beautiful thing about what Russell the things about Russell, of course, is he's the second longest serving MP sitting in the current parliament outside of Bob Catter.
Wow.
And of course, he has been a Liberal up until last year, so that's a mainstreamer. He says there are many things that he says, such pearls of wisdom, such as in politics, you can't play on the fringes, you have to come from the centre. That's a really important lesson for all of us. He also says that he cannot be mocked in Parliament simply because of his service history. He's been there longer than anyone and what he's seen. He
Mm,
also says for him to believe something, this is a big, big statement. He says for him to believe something that's not the status quo, he says, I literally have to be in the room to see it. That's the
yeah.
level of evidence that I want. So when Russell Broadbent says something, you know that it is a fact. And therefore, and especially if he says something that shocks you or shocks the main, and therefore, he is the barometer for when you know that you're being deceived. Because if Russell Broadbent says something and he is forced out of the Liberal Party, which is what he was over pre-selection, not dissimilar to Gerard Rennick, you know that you are being played. And in today's headlines, I actually am going to point as we go to some of the propaganda that we're actually detecting in real time from the Australian mainstream newspapers of both the left and the right. And I did it as an exercise because those who are listening on a daily basis are realizing that I'm chronicling, as this show is a chronicle, of what Murdoch Media does every single day with two hit pieces on Donald Trump. And interestingly, for those that want to go to the website news.com.au, you will see that the first article on the left is always a Trump story. And then on the right, where they list a series of them, he always gets number two spot with a second story. It's always in the same position,
No
even
way.
yeah, even online. That's what drew my eyes to it. I thought, oh, that's like yesterday. And so you have a little bit of a read. And normally I would skim over it because I know that it's propaganda. But what I'm interested in is the way that they deliver these particular stories. So in doing this show, every single day, what we are now seeing is patterns emerging. And so I'm encouraging our listeners to also send to us when they see them patterns that you start noticing, because of course pattern recognition is the first sign of intelligence, right? This is exactly what IQ tests are all about, is
Yes, it
pattern.
is. Yeah.
So if we can start picking what's going on there, we become a lot more discerning, and then we can pick trends. So it is really interesting to see how this is played out. So I love the fact that we get to mock Albo in real time, for which he truly deserves. And I noticed that people are putting comments there that every day is April Fool's Day with a picture of Albo in his clown hat.
Yeah, the
The
timing was perfect, wasn't it? It's interesting. I think they constantly go after Trump in the Australian media. And don't forget, this is the Australian media, and all they focus on is Donald Trump's flaws as they see them. And it's so that they can fill their column inches without holding Anthony Albanese and the Labour Party to account, who are systematically destroying Australian civilization. So, it's a good column inches filler for them, and that's something they consider as well. But it's pretty sad. I'm embarrassed for them. One of the things Russell did say, just going back to him just very briefly, is he did say to me privately that the problem with Australian politicians is that The reason they're not brave enough to tell the truth, he said that no one is prepared to lose anymore. And he comes from a mentality that you have to be strong and you have to be firm and you have to be prepared to lose. And none of them are, because they want to keep the income stream coming in, Jason.
There it is. That's, again, one of the points. When you think again about the column inches analysis there of the newspaper, it's also an interesting component, because what they're doing is they're planting the seeds in Australia that it's the zeitgeist to bash Trump. So
Yeah,
even
it's Trump's fault. It's all Trump's fault. It's not the Labour Party's fault.
So even if you read right-wing media, which is what Murdoch media is meant to be, you're meant to still hate on Trump. Look, an interesting example, the first instance I had of introducing the subject to Trump was to the brother-in-law of a friend on a visit a few years ago, and I brought up the subject of Trump, and I was obviously impressed by something he did. And this particular person was a primary school deputy principal. So I figured he'd have a modicum of intelligence. And when I brought up the subject of Trump, he looked at me, homebrew beer in his hand, snarled with his nose, and said, "Trump's a dickhead." And I thought that taught me so much in the moment of how the propaganda wash does, because this guy was instantly going to dismiss, completely disrespected from where I came from, and knew everything despite not knowing anything.
Because he was told what to think. And that's what the mainstream media, the establishment media, is about, telling people how to think. And it's interesting you mention a teacher there, right? Because I watched a clip earlier and they were talking about, why would you not educate your kids at home? And this was something that I only thought about during the pandemic. And so that your children can do this thing called natural learning, where they watch you run your life and your family, and they see how good parents behave. And they also see how you try and start businesses and run businesses. And one of the things they said was, parents often say when they question why they're not homeschooling, "I can't homeschool my kids because I'm not educated enough to teach them." And so they say to them, well, then if you're not educated enough to teach them from going to school, why would you do the same to your children? Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. At the same time, I will say that at school, I was a bit of a nerd. I ended up doing, 4-unit maths. Let me tell you, 3 weeks, well, three minutes after I finished my last exam, I'd forgotten everything I'd ever learned. So, so
I don't think anything at school is really that worthwhile. I think it's about throwing you into a group of people and you have to sort of adjust and find your place in the pack. And I'm not sure that's necessarily good. It wasn't for one of my children because she struggled with the social aspect of it. She's a very quiet person. And a very good person, and it was just a bit wild at school. And I do think it changes kids. Look, it works for some kids. It worked for me as well. I love going to school. Even if I was deathly ill, I used to trudge through 6 feet of snow in the UK to get to school. And often when I arrived, there was a big handmade sign on the gate saying the pipes are frozen, go home. And I was very disappointed.
Well, absolutely. I too. Look, I did love school, but I did it. I loved it because I got involved, and I think that extracurricular activity at school is the difference. It's one thing to be nerdy and to do well at school, and I was determined because my father instilled in me the importance of becoming a professional at something and getting a university degree. My mother was a nurse who was a certificate nurse, and went old school way, which you learnt on the job, and eventually she decided to get multiple certificates and become quite accomplished in her field. But she didn't go to university, and she used to say to me that there was a vast difference in university trained nurses versus certificate nurses in terms of their willingness to roll their sleeves up and get dirty, and as she would say, wipe the bums, so to speak, which is something that was avoided in it later on as nurses became more professional, were more interested, she would say, in sitting at the keyboard, and that was a different type of nursing that she wasn't into. She went on to become a flight nurse with Air Ambulance for just under 20 years, and
Oh, wow.
and that was, she said, was her dream job. She got that at the age of 47 and pretty much did it until 2 weeks before she passed away at the age of 67. And that's and that was her thing. That was where she was. So it's a really different take on it. But some years ago, probably about almost 20 years ago now, I was in a business that was selling education courses, private education courses in different fields, and one of them was in terms of finance and education. Quite interesting. And we were at a training session on one particular day, understanding what we were actually selling and the detail in the courses, etc. And this particular trainer, we were just talking about the idea that you would need to educate for finance and property, that it wasn't taught in the school system. And she paused for a moment, very clever lady, and she says, look, education's like this. She said, B students work for the government and A students work for the C students. And I thought that is such a brilliant take. That has stood the test of time. If you're not a good student, you must become self-sufficient because the system doesn't look out for you. And the government likes to employ people who are generally going to, know their place and respect their job and do what they do. And the A students are looking for a better deal, and the better deal is in private enterprise that just happens to be operated by the owner who was a C student who is self-taught. And as I said last week, autodidact, those of us who are self-taught. So there is many ways that you can operate and function in society, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the smartest person in the room. And therefore, in terms of homeschooling, which my kids are all homeschooled, well, a very different world. And as my wife will say, I don't necessarily need them to be educated on certain parts of history that they're spending 3 months of a year doing in a particular classroom. So what? I can skim over it and teach them in 2 days what they're going to learn in this 3-month thing, with a project on history of such and such or whatever. But at the end of the day, your kids have got strengths and they've got weaknesses. So we realise one of ours is good at maths and the other one is good at handwriting and storytelling. And so you've got to work on different components of it. But the wonderful thing about homeschooling is that what you achieve in a 6-hour day at school can be achieved in as little as 90 minutes to 2.5 hours at home. So therefore, it opens up the possibility of extracurricular activities that you can do other things. So my kids are into, they're playing cricket, netball, swimming, tennis. And they're not even, I don't even consider them sporty, but they're doing 4 sports there, for
But
goodness
it's
sake.
not just that, Jason. You're teaching them things like how to do tax returns, how to run a bank account and do accounting, and how to cook or survival things. You can do so many things when you're homeschooling. And for anyone who's interested listening, after everything we've been through, and, I know things like vaccine mandates and things come into play now. I think between the ages of 5 and 12, the TGA are currently saying, oh, well, kids need to get mRNA every 12 months. I mean, that's ridiculous, disgusting, and abhorrent after everything we know. So what you do is you have to get in touch with your authority. So for me in Victoria, it's called the Victorian Registration and Qualifying Authority. Copy and paste that for any state, as in the New South Wales Registration and Qualifying Authority. And they give you choices. You can do the normal scheduled learning, and you just have to tell them which books you're going to use, or you can choose the natural learning path, and then you are completely in control of your child's education. One of my children decided to focus from the age of 15 on psychology and then moved on to anatomy. And those are things she would never have been offered if she was in state school education. So again, the Victorian Registration and Qualifying Authority, or the New South Wales Registration and Qualifying Authority, I've got to say I found those departments extremely easy to deal with, very pleasant on the phone and very quick to get back to you. And then once a year, they just send you an email and say, would you like to continue homeschooling, or would you like to go back to school? So it's not a hard thing to do, Jason.
No, it's not. And there is a little bit of a process, and some people choose to follow it completely, and others sort of try to opt out and operate on the fringes, and each to their own in how you're going to do that. But again, as you said, with the kids, the extracurricular activities, and my kids, would you believe it? The young ones are only 9 and 11, and they're really capable in the kitchen.
Yes,
As
but
one
it's
example.
part of it, isn't it? It's part. I
Yeah.
know you're a maths guy. You're very good with maths and numbers, so I'm sure they inherited that, and I know they have. But they do need to learn other life skills as well, and they touch on it in school. You get the odd home economics class, but it's not the same as teaching someone essentially to live independently. I mean, if your kids grow up, get a job, move out, and live independently, you've done a good thing, haven't you? And that's becoming harder and harder to do for kids who are educated in the school system, because they simply don't know anything. As we say, when you leave school, they haven't armed them with any information they can actually use.
This is the hardest thing, because you get out of school and you go, well, why did I need to learn that particular thing about savannas in Africa?
The life cycle of the wombat. My son was taught at the age of 12, and I thought, oh, that's great if he wants to become a vet. But what about the real world?
I did used to laugh though when I went to high school, and I'd have the debating kid in the corner who was always had a big mouth, and he'd put his hand up in a maths class and he'd go, "But sir, why do I need to know about this quadratic equation?" And he would
Algebra.
do
My kids in England used to always do that with algebra. They would go, "What do you mean A plus B equals C times 10? What's going on?" They hated it. All right, let's get to those news headlines, Jason.
Is it already that time?
Yes.
All right, well, let's get into it right now for you. So the RBA has decided to keep interest rates on hold after its third meeting of the year, 1 month after a 0.25% cut. But Michelle Bullock says there are room for cuts if the global trade war takes toll. Meanwhile, gold has passed Australian $5,000 an ounce in a bull market for precious metals.
Ooh.
What a strange world we live in. Let's take a look at the headlines in the Murdoch press. King Charles returns to work after hospitalisation for side effects for cancer treatment. That would be what you would consider a show of strength. Meanwhile, another headline. President Trump is convinced tariffs will lead to vast amounts of tax revenue and more jobs in the US, but many believe it will push up prices and inflation in the US. And Australia now fears US President Donald Trump will slap new tariffs on all imports from overseas, with our allies, Britain and Canada, left completely in the dark over what is being planned. Senior government sources have confirmed that nobody knows exactly what the US president plans to do on April 2 when he unveils his plans for Liberation Day. So the headline there literally uses the word fear and implies that our allies are Britain and Canada, but not the US, despite us being in AUKUS. This is where I'm going. I just want to explain how these headlines are used to manipulate the low information reader or voter that is taking in these half stories and pinning together narratives. Meanwhile, Treasurer Jim Chalmers warned on Tuesday that whatever Trump decides, that the Albanese government will be standing up for Australia's interests. We will continue to stand up for and speak up for Australia's national interests when it comes to the PBS and when it comes to those elements of Australian policy architecture that are so important to us. Those policies are not up for negotiation, he said. Good on you, Chalmers. Wow. We stand up for Australia's national interest. We want to strengthen the PBS, and we will strengthen the PBS because Australians need us to, not weaken the PBS because American multinationals will prefer us to. So, what does that mean? This is the opposite of Make America Healthy Again. It is keeping Australians sicker again. And that is meant to be a sign of success. Well done, Chalmers. And the headline story in The Guardian reads, candidates using influencers, I'll read it again. Candidates using influencers to bypass shadow ban on campaigning by Chinese social media app RedNote. In its exclusive story, it says interviews with influencers who usually post about food or real estate published on the platform, which officially discourages political content. So, Scott Young, the Liberal candidate for the ultra-marginal Sydney seat of Bennelong, which used to be John Howard's seat for 30 years, where almost 1/3 of residents have Chinese ancestry, has featured in multiple interviews shared by Mandarin-speaking influencers on RedNote in recent weeks. The same newspaper ignored the story from Box Hill, where Labor held a meeting in a town hall and excluded any non-Chinese invitees from attending the meeting that featured Penny Wong, Karina Garland and Dan Andrews, though the latter pulled out at the last minute. Once again, how the propaganda is played. Virginia Giuffre was reportedly taken to hospital by ambulance Tuesday seeking treatment for pain. It's understood she will be discharged Wednesday, it said. 7 News also reported that Giuffre's bruising was the result of a fall rather than an accident in a car. While there, it is understood doctors initiated tests that identified issues with her kidneys, and Giuffre was to be discharged the following day. Illegal crossings at the US-Mexico border fell yet again in March, hitting another record, with border agents barely seeing 7,000 migrants enter illegally in the month. That's down 94% from the 137,000 people who poured across the border in March of last year. It follows February crossings of roughly 8,300 illegal immigrants, the lowest in at least 25 years. So that number, a quick calculation, you're looking at something like 20 a day at 7,000, 25 a day, something like that, as opposed to what was much higher in the amount of probably thousands of people a day by comparison. As a result, they say it's the Trump effect, multiple Homeland Security sources told the Post Monday. Now, migrants are scared there are consequences now, says one DHS source, adding everyone who is caught is charged and will do time. Federal prosecutors are seeking the death penalty against the man accused of fatally shooting the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside a Manhattan hotel on the 4th of December, the US Attorney General Pam Bondi has said on Tuesday. Bondi said in the press release that she has directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty for Luigi Mangione, 26, because he allegedly committed a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. And of course, it had many lefties cheering. Remember that one. A Sydney mother has been refused bail after allegedly stabbing her 3 children. The 47-year-old woman was arrested after allegedly attacking the children aged 10, 13 and 16 with a household knife on Monday. Police will allege the 10-year-old boy was stabbed twice, the 13-year-old girl 3 times, and the 16-year-old sustained 1 stab wound and a number of lacerations. She then turned the knife on herself, and one of the children is a paraplegic. She was charged with 3 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent to murder and was in hospital under police guard. The deep state in Romania has cancelled the elections and barred Georgescu, but right-wing candidate George Simion leads now in the polls 14 points ahead of his rivals. Simion is considered more to the right than Georgescu. It appears that Romanians are done with the status quo and the globalists push to the left no matter what. Meanwhile, President Trump and the State Department have strongly condemned France's decision to ban Marine Le Pen in France. Prosecutors claim that Le Pen improperly allocated EU funds meant for parliamentary assistance during her tenure in the European Parliament. Le Monde, one of France's newspapers of record, reported that prosecutors argued in court that she and other National Rally figures redirected the money to finance party operations with France. Le Pen, rejecting the charges as a politically driven attack, has vowed to challenge the ruling through an appeal. And note that she was sentenced to 4 years in prison for this, and 2 years suspended and 2 years to be served on home detention. A previously released classified document from 1954 is making the rounds again on the internet after its release years ago. The document claims Adolf Hitler survived World War II and was living in South America. The document was the CIA's response to allegations that Hitler was living in Colombia and had been there for several years. The article contends Hitler then moved to Argentina in 1955, but argues it's based on hearsay evidence despite posting an alleged photo of Hitler in Colombia. How about that, Nicola?
Well, that was sort of the beginning of Operation Paperclip, wasn't it? Because he wasn't on his own. There were other top Nazis that went with him, and of course, there's the belief that the Nazis themselves were actually Ashkenazis. Look that up for yourself. I find it interesting that Le Pen is being jailed or suspended jail sentence for corruption by a system that is clearly horribly corrupt. I mean, by that measure, all of our politicians should be on at least house arrest, if not incarcerated. But it's interesting that this Luigi guy who did assassinate that health CEO is being jailed for premeditated, cold-blooded assassination. Well, I think the reason he did it is because he believed that Big Pharma is guilty of premeditated, cold-blooded assassination. So it seems justice only swings one way, Jason.
Well, vigilantism is vigilantism. It's one of those things, isn't it? So,
well, this is what happens when people feel they don't have justice. There's nothing right about it. But, it's like that clip of that Australian guy who recognises a GP in a car. And that's gone away now. I think it's been removed from the internet. And he smashes the window of the GP and says to him, "You gave my wife the COVID jab and it's taken her life." And it's one of the most emotional videos I've ever seen. This guy is absolutely desperate. And we don't get any justice. That's what's going on there. It's very one-sided and it's very unfair. I mean, why don't we get to put any of these people in court? Why don't we get to put, the CEO of Pfizer in court? We don't get any of that, Jason, and that's why these situations happen. So quite honestly, it's government policy and inaction that causes this kind of thing.
Look, you're exactly right, but I want to make this point. We have been outing for years, first of all, the complete lack of credentials of Bill Gates. And at the same time,
he's just rich. That's his credentials, rich.
Correct. And he was in an antitrust trial over Microsoft, and he was sort of forced out of that business. So he had to walk away from that. And he was offered in many ways, rather than he discovered the vaccine industry. So he became the puppeteer for all of the nasties that the big pharma industry was going to do.
And then engineered it that we don't get a choice to be his customers. He just decided.
Correct. Now, he's supported by Anthony Fauci, and if there was two people that I'd like to see in handcuffs, it's Gates and Fauci.
Yep.
And I'm not the only one. There would be millions now around the world that this is what we actually would pray that the Easter Bunny will deliver us next month. Seriously.
Yeah.
But none of us are going around vandalizing Tesla motor vehicles because we've got our nose out of joint about corruption being exposed and in other words, shooting the messenger. So we're not the irrational ones. And instead, what we've done in this particular position is that we've reinvented our careers. And speaking just for ourselves here, Nicola, we have become professionals in the media because the media can't do their job properly. We literally we're autodidacts. We've taught ourselves how to do the media, and we're doing the media.
Well, they can do their jobs properly. They're just choosing not to.
But they don't. And that's the point.
Sitting on their hands because they're paid to sit on their hands.
If the media did their job properly, I would be out there doing a completely different job. I wouldn't need to do what I'm doing.
I'll tell you what frustrates me about the media, Jason. I talked about this in my speech on Sunday. You talk about wanting to know what I spoke about on Sunday as well, right? Here's what I talked about. And I call this particular speech that I do called 5 minutes ago. Right, because 5 minutes ago, we were told following 9/11 that it was Muslim extremists and we should all fear Muslim extremists, and that we enacted the war on terror, and that we supported Operation Shock and Awe that killed 1 million Iraqis. We invaded Afghanistan, that there was no outrage about that, the way there is outrage about Gaza. Right, we supported all this because we believed the lie about weapons of mass destruction. And so we all got this fear about Muslim extremists, and we accepted all these security measures at airports and the TSA, and walking through scanners and getting checked and felt up by bloody TSA officials. The amount of times I've been felt up going through the airport is disgusting. And now they've done a complete pivot, because that was 5 minutes ago, right? Now they've done a complete pivot, and you're racist and you're Islamophobic if you don't accept all this unchecked migration, and you don't accept all the violence on the street and women being raped into oblivion in countries because their culture is different to ours. And they're calling us racist. So why weren't you racist when you lied about weapons of mass destruction, when you went and slaughtered 1 million Iraqis, when you told us that it was Muslim extremists on 9/11? And as it turns out, probably wasn't. This was another engineered crisis that you could bring in additional security measures and indoctrinate us to accept that. You're not racist when you make up lies about Muslims, but if we get worried about the violence on our streets, then we're racist. These people are complete hypocrites. These people are in the media that sit on their hands, Jason. They never look at both sides of it, right? They never report on the truth. They used to. I remember the BBC going to Ukraine and doing stories about the Nazis in Ukraine, the new neo-Nazis that were rising up, and that got rapidly buried, right? So I really am angry with the media, and I can see why after World War II, it was the media that was held to account at Nuremberg, because, the media propaganda, I think it was Hitler himself that says, if you own the media, you own the world. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening. And it's so disappointing that these big media companies are Australian owned, and now they're weaponizing their media against Australians, and it's got to stop. It is so, what's the word? It's malfeasance, it's all kinds of crimes, and they continue to do it. So you can say anything you want about Muslim extremists whenever it benefits you politically and militarily, and you're not racist. But if we get concerned about being attacked in the streets or in our beds by machete-wielding new migrants, we're racist, Jason.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll give you two examples right now. The lefties losing their minds on social media. So one of the posts I saw recently, possibly yesterday or the day before, was attacking Elon Musk, and it said, "Send this South African home." Now, that is racism 101. If you are identifying a person based on where they are from, you're a racist. So I called him out on it. And of course, nothing, but that's what it is. Now, yesterday, there's this other imbecilic Twitter handle, and there were literally, tens of thousands of these clowns. And they put up the most pathetic posts, but they get 100,000 views. So they end up in your feed. And sometimes I just can't help but saying something. There's one called Canadians Hate Trump. And so they put something out there, and I'll just write something, hate harder, dickhead. Because that's all you've got. You just hate. Now the point is that we're told not to hate. That hate is bad. That hate speech, like that is, they literally, the handle is hate. Where the hell is that e-safety commissioner Karen woman? I've even forgotten her name now because she's so ridiculous.
She's gone. She's disappeared. Nobody likes her. But you're absolutely right. The hate is okay if it's from them.
Yeah, the hate is in the name. So anyway, I wrote something there, and this hate machine takes a picture of my ex and my photograph that's on there, my profile picture, and then writes Australian moron on the top of it, and then posts it. So more hate. But
I find it's a compliment, Jason, right? I always say to people, when people troll me, it never works because it actually makes me laugh. I find it really entertaining because I'm always like, for someone who doesn't like me very much, you spend a lot of time looking at my stuff.
Well, very true. But my point there is the fact that they said Australian, like they want to single me out from where I'm from. So I'm going, hang on a second.
You're just a dirty, filthy Australian. You know what I mean? You'll get your yellow star soon, Jason.
Exactly. But then they'll say to me, "Oh, but you're Australian. It's not racist." I go, hang on a second. You just attacked me from where I'm from. Doesn't matter. So you can be Australian and have yellow skin, brown skin, black skin, white skin. Are you trying to tell me that because you think my skin is white, that somehow it's not a racist attack?
But this has all been engineered by government to make people feel this way because, I'm like tricontinental or whatever the word is. I grew up in the UK, then I lived in America for 7 years, and I've been in Australia for 30 years, right? So I've grown up in these three very distinct territories, and racism was never a problem. Racism began to be engineered during the Obama years. Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, they fueled this. They basically said that all white Americans were racist, and that's not what I found at all. And governments engineer this because they want us fighting against each other. And then the likes of Anthony Albanese, who plagiarizes bloody film scripts for his speeches, he gets up there. I think he got up there yesterday and he said, social cohesion is what we want in society. We want our Muslim friends to feel welcome. These are the same governments, as I said 5 minutes ago, who were telling us to be absolutely mortally terrified of Muslim extremists. These people are liars. They were liars then, and they're liars today. And they are causing this kind of racism, xenophobia, whatever you want to call it on social media, that someone would do that to your page. I get told to piss off back home. You're not even Australian, which is the same kind of thing, right? Yes, I'll just leave my Australian husband and, my 30-year life in Australia. And this has been engineered. So we fight amongst ourselves. So if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we're not looking at what they're doing. If they put up stories shit-canning Trump, we're not putting up stories shit-canning Albo or Dutton. That's what they're doing, Jason. This person that did that to you has been manipulated, has been indoctrinated into a cult of hate by government. They're weak. That's why they've fallen for it. They're weak.
Oh, look, absolutely. And it's funny you should say that because another one of these particular posts, they attack Trump, because they come out like the liar, the rapist, they list every piece of possible hate that they can come up with. And so, I challenged another one of these people, and they fight back, and then they say, so you're condoning rape, are you? I said, well, no, what I'm doing is I'm telling you that the verdict was bullshit. First of all, it was a civil trial with this E. Jean Carroll. So it was on the balance of probabilities, and it was in New York, and it had a biased case and jury. That's what I'm alleging. But I'm also saying that the facts of the case mean that the judgment was nonsense because E. Jean Carroll couldn't remember what year it happened. E. Jean Carroll couldn't remember what dress she was wearing at the alleged incident because the dress that she said she was wearing by Donna Karan hadn't been invented in the year of the alleged crime. So there are two facts that are wrong. Now, in any normal case, if you get two fundamental facts like that you can't even identify when it happened, you can't make proof. And therefore, it's a lack of evidence and it's dismissed. But when it was Donald Trump, they went the other way. So they're just two facts. So this guy goes, well, are you telling me that you know more than the jury that heard all the facts? I said, mate, I've read the transcripts. I'm as good as
you're allowed to have your opinion. That's the thing. You're allowed to have your opinion on that.
And so I said, here's what you don't get, is that people on the Trump side of the fence are here for a number of different reasons. But many of us are here because he's the only one that's done anything against human trafficking, which is far bigger in a crime that you guys want to ignore when it suits you, like Pizzagate. All of them, went to the ground. They want to know about it. But whenever the Epstein story comes up, the same people put a photo of Epstein and Trump, and they think that's the end of it. And I go,
well, why don't they go up against Prince Andrew? His victim is actually speaking out now, and all the facts and times are correct. They don't say anything about that.
They don't say anything about that either. So we know that they're hypocrites. Now, anyway, after this backwards and forwards, I decided to change tact with this fellow, and I explained exactly what you said. And I said this: if it turns out that we were to believe, and we had convincing evidence, that Trump was doing horrible things to women or children, his supporters would drop him in a heartbeat.
Totally.
And that is the truth. That is 1,000% the truth, because we're not hypocrites and we're out there to protect. And this is what I think is really interesting, is those of us that are the conservatives are actually really, in many cases, the true left, because we protect the children, which ironically the left, who protect everyone, are pro-abortion and don't care about killing their own young. I can't understand that hypocrisy. I just have never been able to understand that. So again, what I did with this fellow is I said, look, this is made to divide us. This is exactly what this is all about. I said, we're much bigger than this and much better than that. I said, I'm happy to debate you, but I'm telling you right now that if the evidence was there, we'd drop him in a heartbeat, and I would expect the same. So I thought that is a olive branch. Let's see where we go with this fellow. I said, I don't expect anything, but I'm putting it out there, and I hope that we can have a normal conversation, because really we're on the same team. We don't support the fact that anyone would be harmed by someone in a power relationship like that. And what did he come back and say? He just doubled down on Trump being a racist. And I thought, you are an effing imbecile. Get lost.
You shouldn't feed the trolls, Jason.
But what I did, I agree with that. And Lionel Nation, who I'm interviewing next week, actually said, don't waste your time with people like this. And he's right.
Yeah.
And I thought, given that I've gone down this pathway, let's see if we can actually prove who's the bigger person here. And that was all the proof that I needed at that point. You're right. They cannot be convinced. And many of my friends say to me now, in this great awakening situation that we're living through, we have tried for years, longer than World War I or longer than World War II, to educate. These people cannot be educated, and so be it. And here we go. And this is why I argue in the opening that we are headed into a new world. There is no status quo. There are people that will literally vaccinate themselves into oblivion out of fear. Whatever new world is coming, whether it's post-2030 or post-2026 or whatever's coming, or whether you read that Deagle report that the population of the West is going to slump and plummet, all of which could become true one way or another.
Well, it is true, but you're not noticing it because of the rampant migration.
Well, yeah, but it's the total Earth population has to fall. But of course, it is only the West that really got jabbed up the wazoo.
Absolutely hammered. Yeah.
Because you look at the numbers. An interesting one, the ultimate test is always Palestine, Israel, when it comes down to the vaccines, because Israel was well over 75%, and at some point they were saying it was virtually 90%, but it came down. People stopped taking it after 2, and the numbers fell quite quickly into the 60s. However, Palestine never got over 27%. So therefore, the Palestinians, based on vaccination alone, should have outperformed. Well, for years, years ago, for months, I was reporting every periodically on the Israel-Palestine comparisons. And I'll say this straight out: Palestine defeated Israel on every single metric on COVID. Less cases, less hospitalizations, less deaths. And that's per capita. So when you compare apples with apples, they beat them on everything. And so it was obvious at that point. And if you couldn't use that as anecdotal evidence, you couldn't. Now, what was really interesting the other day was Steve Kirsch wrote a story on Substack talking specifically about Palestine and Israel, and he was asking some pointed questions. And I actually wrote a comment on there, and I said, well, I've been reporting this for some time, and this is what I worked out. And he actually responded, which was pretty cool, and asked a further question, to which I provided answer, but then that was the end of that. But it's just interesting, isn't it, that you can put a story up, and the work that we've done over years is coming back all the time. And literally the work I did 4 or 5 years ago is engaging in a brief conversation with Steve Kirsch, a billionaire who is completely well known, been on everyone's shows talking about it. Someone who took the vaccine himself, realized that he'd been deceived, and has been fighting against it ever since.
Yeah, that was a sad story. I think what the left do, and the reason, I always move away from the left, is that they cherry pick their righteous indignation, right? Because
Correct.
they say they want you all to inject to protect granny, and everyone's got to be safe, and this, that, and the other. But then they're more than happy for, a 5-month-old fetus to be terminated, aborted, slaughtered, essentially, in my opinion. And I'm sorry if that's harsh if you're listening. A fetus that has a 30% chance of survival. And what they do is they promote it, obviously, because they're worried about global populations. And they put these abortion clinics in America in predominantly Black neighborhoods. There have been more Black babies aborted in America than have been born in the last 50 years, which is so devastating. But what they do is they engineer the media so that you never look at it. No one ever looks at a picture of that 5-month-old fetus, which is a human being, a baby, on the dish. They're prepared to let it die or send it off to Dr. Fauci. They won't look at it. And, they also are refusing to look at these, as you say, adverse reactions from their injections. They just bury it, and then they'll come out and want you to focus on something that supposedly happened with Trump, with a woman so many years ago. She can't remember where she was or what she was wearing. And so, they're just reaching. This is called reaching. They're reaching for anything. And they're just insane with rage. I mean, when you see some of these clips of these hordes of people with everything that's going on in the world, hordes of people chasing people in Tesla Cybertrucks down the road, people who the left were previously hailing for driving electric vehicles, and now they're pelting them and ripping them apart and setting them on fire and saying, you're a loser for driving Tesla. I mean, make up your mind, will you? Are we saving the planet, or are we attacking Elon Musk? Because there could be an opposing protest on the other side of the road screaming at those protesters, if we were as insane as they are, going, stop. We want to save the planet. Let them drive their Cybertruck. Make up your bloody minds. We're either saving people with the injections, or we're aborting them because, well, it's not convenient for my life, or we're saving the planet with electric vehicles, or we're not because we don't like Elon Musk. I mean, these people are insane. They're flip-floppers, and it just proves that there is no legitimacy to any of their arguments because they can flip on them so quickly, right? They in America, they call them flip-floppers, and I don't admire that kind of attitude, right? That's the difference between conservatives and lefties. Conservatives of the family values and children and, small government instead of big government, and lowering taxes and increasing freedom. That never changes. That has never changed. Whereas the left are constantly changing, Jason, and that's the problem I have with it.
Well, there's a video of E. Jean Carroll, this particular person that was obviously...
You don't like him now, do you?
Her. This is the woman that...
E. Jean Carroll. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Ian Carroll again.
No. E. Jean is her name. She's this particular woman who is not particularly attractive. And remembering that Trump is married to Melania, one of the most striking...
Well, you can't say that. She's probably aged. None of us are particularly attractive when we get past a certain age.
Well, Melania Trump's in her 50s, and she's particularly striking. And when you compare...
If I had her money, I'd be particularly striking as well, believe me. You can spend $1,000 on face creams that really do stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit subjective here. Melania Trump is particularly striking. Nicola Charles is also particularly striking, and E. Jean Carroll is particularly unstriking. So that's just for some perspective.
But was E. Jean Carroll particularly striking in her heyday that she's claiming she was assaulted in?
Not even close.
Right.
Not even close. So anyway, and Donald Trump is known to be particularly choosy, let's say, in terms of the quality of the appearance of the women
I
that
think
he's been
men are not
associated
that choosy. I'm sorry. I think they're flip-floppy. I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about all men. But
You're talking
men.
about Bill Clinton, and well, let's quote.
Or they
Billy
go
Crystal.
with strippers, they go with interns, they go with their wife, they go with Marilyn Monroe. Men are not, no offense, men. It's my husband's birthday today. I shouldn't say this. And not all men are like this. But what I'm saying, men who are love rats, there's no difference to them sex-wise between their wife, a stripper, Marilyn Monroe, and, an intern. I mean, that story of Bill Clinton with the cigar, I mean, come on.
Let me quote my favourite comedian, Billy Crystal, from the film City Slickers, when he said to his mate, played by Bruno Kirby, and he said, "Women need a reason to have sex. Men just need a place."
Oh, my God.
It was a joke, but it was very funny. Anyway, where I was going with E. Jean Carroll is she did an interview with Anderson Cooper on CNN, and I shared it in this particular thread with this lunatic.
Lovely Anderson Cooper. Yeah.
And you ready for this? E. Jean Carroll says to Anderson Cooper that rape is sexy.
She did not.
She did so, and I will share it on my page, and you can make that one go more viral than Albanese with the American president.
What a despicable thing to say.
She says that. Anderson Cooper's face drops and throws to a break. Right? This woman's an absolute, she's insane. And this is why, this is another piece of evidence going along with, didn't remember the date, didn't remember what she wore. Now, remember you just said with Monica Lewinsky and the cigar and that particular situation. Remember the whole thing about the dress and the DNA of Bill Clinton on the dress?
Well, she at least had the dress.
So this other woman goes through this particular alleged story, can't remember the dress, doesn't know what she did with the dress, blanks it out, but 30 years later decides, oh, that's right, that was Donald Trump. I think I know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go to court and get $60 million.
All these women with these dresses. What is it about dresses? I don't ever wear dresses. All these dresses they were wearing when they were assaulted, very rare. I'd have to be going to the Logies to put a frock on. I mean, what is going on? It's all so unsavory. And look, this isn't just politics. This is life in general. But these powerful men, they are targets for women saying they were assaulted because they know they'll just pay them off so they don't ruin their life. And also there's precedents that get set, so you have to be careful. Now, look, I think if it's found out criminally, and this was a civil case, so this was about money, right? But if it's found out criminally, someone is guilty of rape or assault, then they should face the full force of the law. However, I've always said, always publicly, if it is found that a woman lied to try and destroy a man's character and slander him and ruin his business and his career prospects with a lie, that woman should not be paid off. To be quiet, she should face the same jail sentence that the man would have faced if he'd been found guilty of something that was fabricated. Yep. Because we need to set precedents that you can't just go around lying about men. It's absolutely terrifying because men now, and I always advise my friends, my business associates, never be alone in a car with a woman, in business. Don't travel just you and the woman in a car. Don't be in an office alone with a woman with the door closed. Leave the door open, because these are the kind of things that men have to think about now. Otherwise, they can be accused of all sorts because something can happen in 5 minutes. And that's a horrible way to live. But unfortunately, there are people out there looking for money that will make stuff up. So they can go to these civil cases. No civil case should ever occur unless there's been a criminal conviction, in my opinion.
It is so true, isn't it? If you want to make an allegation as heinous as that to falsely accuse someone, then the false allegation, once also proven, should be met with the same punishment.
Well, we've all got sons. Everyone listening, you've got sons. And if you're a woman listening and you're outraged and going, oh my God, Nicola, you should be more pro-women. Think about your sons. Think about your brothers. Think about your dads and granddads. They could also fall foul of this. You could do well in your career as a woman. You could end up going into politics, and then someone make something up about your son or your brother or your father to bring your career down. There has to be very firm rules on this. And look, if you think you've got a case and you can prove it, any woman out there who's been raped, and I know it's very, very hard, and unfortunately we live in a world now where rapes are going up, you must immediately go to the police so that evidence can be gathered, so there's no question about it. There has to be this limited time thing. The statute has to run out, because you can't suddenly come out of the woodwork 25 years later. And I do understand that it's difficult, because I was assaulted as a 5-year-old child by a paedophile who was a neighbor of mine, and I didn't know he was a paedophile until I knew he was a paedophile. But I was very, very small. I was 5, right? And that memory is burnt into my head, and it disgusts me. But I didn't tell my mum or anyone until I was 22. So there's nothing I could do about it, and the guy had died by then. But as an adult, if anything happens, you must go immediately to the police. It's horrible, but you must have evidence gathered if you want to bring this person to justice, because after that, it's going to be very hard, and it could be construed that you're just seeking money from a civil case. That's my opinion on it, and I know it's harsh. I'm sorry, Jason.
No, I think that's the point. I really do. But I also agree with you that that these things go unreported because of the power structure. If the assailant threatens the person that they've attacked with further punishment, literally.
Well,
punishment.
I don't react well to threats. If someone threatened me, then yeah, I'd go all out to get them. But I don't think Trump threatened this woman, to be honest.
Well, this again is the point. So there are far worse scenarios that have gone around. It's very clear. Now, and the reason that all this is so interesting and why we can talk about it for so long is that we're seeing this example of lawfare being conducted against those that are running against literally the deep state globalists. You've got Marine Le Pen, who's now been sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for what seems to be the most ordinary conviction of all time. So prosecutors claiming she improperly, not unlawfully, improperly allocated EU funds meant for parliamentary assistance during her
Macron
tenure.
is a criminal. Macron is a criminal globalist. So we're not investigating him. He's fine.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the point. So this is lawfare, that you go after your political opponents. But even like EU funds for parliamentary assistance, what are we talking about? 1,000 francs?
And all of the headlines are
euros?
saying she's far right, far right. This is the thing. You can't be right anymore. You can't be a conservative.
No.
We're not far right. We're just right. That's what's going on. And they don't want us there, because we're going to point out what's going on globally. And France and Germany, they are key states within this European Union that they want to keep control of. And so that's why she can't be allowed to be there. I think it's awful. We're getting towards the end of the show, Jason. I've had a few rants today. I did just want to touch on this Scott Young and all this, the liberal guy, and how they're using these influencers on sites for food and real estate to talk about Australian politics. What worries me about that is we're having, and I've said before, about migration. I'm a migrant myself. When you've got Australian policy and politics and future plans being discussed in another language, you're again shutting out the original Australians from that process, and that worries me a little bit.
It is interesting, but this is a particular Chinese app, so it's a different story. But the thing is,
but why is Australian democracy on a Chinese app? It's odd.
Yeah, but it's for Chinese Australians, because the other thing is John Howard. There's a photograph with John Howard with this particular candidate, so he's the new candidate in John Howard's old seat. Now,
but aren't we encouraging assimilation? I mean, Albanese himself is talking about that, right? He wants a cohesive society. Well, if you want a cohesive society, then you're going to have to run your meetings and your online promotions in English and Chinese. Right? We used to use subtitles. This is an English-speaking country with a Christian constitution. So you have these things in English, and you can have all the Chinese subtitles you want. But when you close the doors on Australians and say this is Chinese only because you don't speak Chinese, I'll tell you what, I am very close to going out and learning Mandarin, because I want to know what's going on.
Well, you're going to have to learn Mandarin and Cantonese, so you've got 2 languages to learn at least to understand what's being spoken. And that's the other point, isn't it? Because how is this communication? You're right, but equally you could, if you wanted to, You could run that particular clip and you would have an English language subtitle emerging on it if people were interested. What I find fascinating about it, though, is that they've now got a conservative Chinese candidate running for the Liberals in the seat of Bennelong, which is surrounding the area of Eastwood. Now, those people that are aware of the suburb of Eastwood in the sort of the inner northwest of Sydney, near Epping, is that it's literally become the de facto Chinatown of Sydney. It's an incredible...
but is a Chinese conservative, or are they a Chinese communist? Because
that's exactly where I was going, because that was the question I wanted to ask: is are they CCP infiltrating both sides? But I'll just make this point that Eastwood is the new Chinatown of Sydney. It's an incredible area, a lot of development, but like Chinatown, for some reason, the area it seems to decay very quickly, and maybe because it's so busy, maybe it just has that feeling. But to go there, you feel like you're literally a tourist. But it's amazing. I love going there, and we went there for years and years. I don't go there anymore because I live too far away. But I do remember the last time I went, that every restaurant we went on, I think we were going to some sort of event at Homebush at the Olympic Stadium, and we couldn't get into a single restaurant. It was absolutely chock-a-block on maybe a Friday or a Saturday night. And we just sort of got an outside seat in probably the fifth restaurant that I'd chosen, and wasn't particularly interested in going there. But you've got something like 30 restaurants or 40 restaurants in a street, just to give you an idea of what's going on. So the fabric has changed. It is an enclave, if you will, that we see all around Sydney. That we have, little Chinatown. You go to Olbourne, and it's Middle Eastern, and you go to other areas. You go obviously to Haberfield and Leichhardt, and it's Italian, and you will get these enclaves. This is just what culture is. It can't all be homogenized.
I prefer English-speaking presentations about our politics with subtitles for new Australians. I don't trust Chinese or Arabic or Hindu speaking presentations where we're given the English version. Why? Because someone is typing in what they're saying, and they can adjust those subtitles so that we don't actually really know what's going on. That is my concern. Right. If you want social cohesion, Albo, and you want assimilation in society, which he doesn't seem to go for at all. He wants separate communities. In fact, as I've said before, these new Australians' visas require they live in certain parts of town. If that isn't racist, I don't know what is. We're really, really, really run over the end of the show. Jason, what would you like to say before we go?
Well, we are in the middle of Hump Day. It is a big week of news once again, and I feel confident that we are moving in the right direction despite the pressures. We have an election coming up, and it is full speed ahead. There's a lot that we're going to talk about in later parts of the week. There was a big story we didn't even get to. We'll hold that one over for tomorrow. But if you do get a chance, I would encourage people to check out on my page the interview I did yesterday with Matt Camanzuli, the independent candidate for McMahon, and also with war correspondent Michael Yon. That's on my 51st State show for those that are interested in checking that out. I'll have that posted on the page later.
Wonderful. Happy Hump Day, everyone. Happy birthday to my husband. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne. We'll do this all over again tomorrow.